The air in the Devonshire House ballroom was thick with perfume, ambition, and the breathless anticipation of the marriage mart. But for Alistair Blackwood, the Duke of Rothschild, it was a gilded cage of false smiles and simpering debutantes. He arrived notoriously late, intending to make a brief appearance and flee. But as he bypassed the grand staircase, a sound stopped him cold. Not the swell of the orchestra, but the gut-wrenching sound of a woman's muffled sob, hidden behind a pillar of cold, unforgiving marble. He was the most powerful man in the room, and he had just found his future Duchess at her absolute lowest. The ballroom at Devonshire House was a galaxy of light, sound, and crushing expectation. It was the pinnacle of the 1844 London season, and the Duchess of Devonshire's annual ball was the hunting ground. Mothers, dressed like generals commanding an army, surveyed the floor, whispering directives to their daughters, whose smiles were as bright and brittle as spun glass. Alistair Blackwood, the Duke of Rothschild, despised it. He stood in the entryway, unseen for a moment, his dark evening attire a stark contrast to the glittering jewels and pale silks of the ton. At 30, Alistair was the most sought-after bachelor in England. His title was ancient, his wealth immeasurable, and his countenance carved from unforgiving granite. He was, as the Tatler proclaimed weekly, the glacial duke, and he had no intention of melting. He was late, intentionally so. His man, Thorn, had laid out his clothes 3 hours ago. Alistair had spent 2 of those hours in his study, reading a treatise on Roman aqueducts, finding it infinitely more compelling than the prospect of fending off matchmaking mamas. He finally arrived, handing his card to a footman who nearly dropped it when he read the crest. The Duke of Rothschild. He'd come. The whispers would start immediately. He bypassed the grand ballroom, aiming for the terrace. He would take a single glass of champagne, be seen by the Duchess, and then plead a headache that was, in fact, rapidly forming from the sheer volume of the orchestra, which was butchering a new waltz by Strauss. He moved down a quieter corridor, one lined with Roman busts and towering potted ferns. The music here was faint, but another sound was not. Hic, sob, gasp. It was the sound of someone trying desperately not to cry, and failing. It was a sound of true despair, raw and painful, completely out of place in this palace of artifice. Alistair stopped. He was not a kind man, by reputation. He was precise, logical, and intolerant of foolishness. Hysterical debutantes fainting over a spilled drink or a snubbed dance card were the height of foolishness. But this was different. This wasn't a performance. This was grief. He followed the sound into a small alcove, almost hidden behind a massive, fluted marble column. There, huddled in the shadow, was a young woman. Her back was to him. Her shoulders trembled. She was pressing a lace glove to her mouth to muffle the sounds. Her dress was a simple, pale blue silk, elegant, but noticeably lacking the ostentatious jewels and French lace of the other attendees. Her hair, a rich chestnut brown, was coiled simply, a few tendrils already escaping in her distress. Alas, he did not want to get involved. It was not his business. He should turn, leave, and forget it. But he found his feet moving forward. "A handkerchief," he said. His voice, deep and unused to softness, sounded like gravel. The woman froze. Her sobbing stopped in a choked gasp. She spun around, her eyes wide with panic and humiliation. Alistair had a sudden, sharp intake of breath. He had been expecting a simpering girl. This woman was beautiful, but it was a beauty of character, not confection. Her eyes were not blue, but a startling, clear shade of green, currently swimming in tears and reddened at the rims. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. She stared at him, mortified. She hadn't recognized him. In the shadows he was just a tall, imposing man in dark evening wear. I beg your pardon," she stammered, frantically wiping at her cheeks with her gloved hand, which only smeared the tears. "I thought I was alone. Please forgive the intrusion." She tried to dart past him, back toward the noise and the light. Alistair did something he had never done. He put a hand on the column, blocking her path. "I believe," he said, slowly, "that I am the one intruding. But you are clearly in distress." He held out the handkerchief again. It was fine linen, monogrammed with a simple R. She hesitated, then took it. Her fingers, small and trembling, brushed his. She buried her face in the linen for a long, shuddering moment. "You are very kind, sir," she whispered, her voice thick. "But you must not be seen with me. It is... I am..." "You are what?" Alistair asked. He was no longer just curious. He was intrigued. In a world of actors, he had found the only real person in the room. "I am compromised," she whispered, the word tasting like ash. "And if you are seen offering me comfort, your reputation will suffer by association." Alistair almost laughed. If she only knew. "My reputation, madam, is robust. It can withstand a great deal. Tell me what happened. Or rather," he corrected, "tell me who." Genevieve Croft had never felt such profound humiliation. She had known this season was a long shot. Her father, Baron Croft, was a good man, a scholar who cared more for ancient ruins than crop rotation, which was why their modest estate in Kent was crumbling. They were respectable, but they were poor. This one season, funded by the sale of her grandmother's pearls, was her only chance to secure a future for her family. And she had been so foolish, so utterly, hopelessly foolish. Lord Julian Cavendish. He was the third son of the Marquess of Winchester. He was handsome, charming, and possessed a smile that seemed to promise sunlight. He had sought her out at the beginning of the season. He hadn't danced with her at the major balls, but he had found her in the corners, at smaller music halls, in the park. He had spoken of his disdain for the empty-headed heiresses and his admiration for her quiet intelligence and natural grace. He had led her to believe he was serious. He had hinted at speaking to her father. Tonight she had seen him by the punch bowl, surrounded by his laughing friends, and, most notably, Lady Diana Fawsley, whose dowry was rumoured to be large enough to buy half of Scotland. Genevieve, bolstered by a surge of hope, had approached him. "Lord Julian," she'd said, her voice soft. He had turned. His charming smile was gone, replaced by something cold and sneering. "Lady Genevieve, have you lost your chaperone, or are you simply lost in general?" His friends snickered. Lady Diana looked on with detached amusement. I don't understand," Genevieve murmured, her face warming with a blush. "Allow me to clarify," Julian said, his voice loud enough for the surrounding groups to hear. "I find your persistence tiresome. A country mouse must learn its place. Did you truly believe your father's paltry 500 a year was worth my time? Did you think I would shackle myself to your family's debts?" He leaned in, his voice dropping to a theatrical, cruel whisper. "You are nothing, Lady Genevieve. A desperate, plain-faced girl trying to trap a lion. Go home." The laughter that followed was like a physical blow. The world had tilted. She had fled, blind with tears, finding this alcove by sheer chance, the sound of her world collapsing, echoing in her ears. And now, this stranger. "Who?" he repeated, his voice gentle but insistent. "It doesn't matter," she said, pulling herself together. She had to be strong. She was a Croft. "He is right. I was foolish. I will trouble you no longer." She handed back the damp handkerchief. "Thank you for your kindness, sir." "I will not accept it," Alistair said, pushing the handkerchief gently back into her hand. "Not until you tell me his name. A man who uses public humiliation as a weapon does not deserve the anonymity of the shadows." Genevieve looked up at him. His face was in the dim light now. He was older than she'd first thought, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through her. He was not handsome in the conventional, charming way of Julian. He was formidable. "It was Lord Julian Cavendish," she whispered. Alistair's face did not change, but his eyes hardened until they were chips of ice. Cavendish. Of course. A gambler, a braggart, and a coward. "You know him." "I know of him," Alistair said curtly. "He frequents the same gaming hells as my dissolute cousin. His debts are the talk of Whitus. He is desperate, and desperation, it seems, has made him cruel." He looked at her, his gaze assessing. "He did this because you are a threat to his real target." "His target?" "The heiress, Lady Diana Forsley. By humiliating you, he proves his devotion to her and her fortune. He severs the tie he clearly cultivated with you, and he does it in a way that makes you look the fool, not him." Genevieve's tears threatened again, this time from anger. "He made me believe. He made you believe what he needed you to," Alistair finished. He offered her his arm, a simple, formal gesture. What are you doing?" she asked, baffled. "You have two choices, Lady Genevieve. You can leave this ball, flee to the country, and allow Lord Cavendish's narrative to become the truth. You will be the desperate Lady Croft who was put in her place. Or," he said, his voice dropping, "you can return to that ballroom, on my arm, and we can write a new ending to this chapter." "On your arm?" "Sir, you don't understand. I am ruined. No one will dance with me. No one will speak to me. To be seen with me. It would ruin you." For the first time that night, the corner of Alistair's mouth twitched. "Madam, I assure you, I am entirely unruinable. My name," he said, as if it were an afterthought, "is Alistair." "Alistair," she repeated. "Just Alistair? For now, it is all you need." He offered his arm again. "Will you come, Lady Genevieve? Will you let me return you to your aunt?" She looked at his arm. It was solid, strong. She looked back toward the ballroom, the place of her execution. She was terrified. But the alternative, fleeing in shame, was worse. She was the daughter of a baron. She had pride. She placed her trembling hand on his sleeve. "Thank you, Alistair, sir." "Alistair," he insisted. "Alistair." He nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Good. Now, compose yourself. Lift your chin. We are not going to sneak out. We are going to enter." As they neared the ballroom archway, the light and sound washed over them. Genevieve felt a wave of dizziness. Every face seemed to be leering, every whisper a comment about her. She could see Julian, still holding court by the punch bowl, a triumphant smirk on his face. "I cannot," she breathed, her hand tightening on Alistair's arm. "He is watching." "Excellent," Alistair said, his voice a low rumble in her ear. "Then he will have a good view." He did not guide her to the edge of the room. He did not steer her toward the dowager's row to find her aunt. He walked them directly onto the polished dance floor, just as the orchestra concluded one piece and prepared for the next. A hush began to fall. It started with the groups nearest the archway. "Good heavens, that's Rothschild. He actually came. But who is he with? Is that Lady Genevieve Croft? The one Cavendish just dressed down? Impossible." The whispers spread like wildfire, silencing the chatter, the laughter, and even the clinking of glasses. The orchestra conductor, seeing the Duke on the floor, paused, his baton raised. Julian Cavendish's smirk froze. His face went slack with disbelief, then contorted into a mask of sudden, dark red fury. Genevieve felt the blood drain from her face. "They are all staring," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Alistair, please, what are you doing?" "I am securing you a dance," Alistair said calmly. He signalled to the conductor. "A waltz, now." The conductor, startled into action, tapped his stand. The opening bars of the Kaiserwälzer, the Emperor's Waltz, filled the stunned silence. Alistair turned to Genevieve. He bowed, a formal, perfect gesture. "Lady Genevieve, may I have the honour?" She was trapped. Every eye in London society, the very people who had witnessed her humiliation minutes before, was fixed on her. To refuse was to create an even bigger scandal, to snub a duke. Your Grace," she stammered, the realization finally hitting her as she saw the crest on his buttons, the way the Duchess of Devonshire herself was clutching her pearls, her eyes wide with shock. The man from the alcove. "Alistair." He was Alistair Blackwood, the Duke of Rothschild, the glacial Duke, the man who never danced, the man who owned half of Mayfair. "You," she breathed. "We can discuss my identity later," he murmured, taking her hand. He placed his other hand firmly on her waist. It was not the light, barely there touch of a society dance. It was possessive. It was a statement. "For now, dance with me." He swung her onto the floor. If the room was silent before, it was now a vacuum. The only sound was the soaring melody of the waltz. Alistair was an exquisite dancer. He was strong, precise, and led with a confidence that left no room for error. Genevieve, who had been taught well, found herself following him instinctively, her feet moving as if in a dream. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, her eyes fixed on the stark white of his cravat, too afraid to look at the hundreds of faces staring at them. "Lift your head, Lady Genevieve," he commanded softly. "Look at me." She did. His eyes were not cold now. They were focused, intense, and fixed only on her. "You asked why," he continued, his voice for her ears alone as he spun them in a perfect, graceful arc. "Because I do not abide bullies, and I do not abide public spectacles at the expense of the innocent." "You are making me a spectacle," she protested weakly, though she was beginning to feel a strange, liquid warmth spreading through her veins. It was the absence of humiliation. It was safety. "No," he said. "I am making him one." He angled the dance, sweeping them past the punch bowl. Genevieve's eyes met Julian's over Alistair's shoulder. Julian Cavendish looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His quarry, the ruined country mouse, was not just in the arms of a duke, but the duke, the most powerful, unattainable, and ruthless man in England. It was a public, definitive, and humiliating rebuttal of Cavendish's own power. Lady Diana Fawsley, the heiress, was looking at Julian with a new, speculative coldness. She was not interested in a man who made enemies of dukes. "You see," Alistair murmured, "his narrative is already crumbling." They danced on. Genevieve, lost in the shock and the impossible security of his embrace, felt a single, hot tear trace a path down her cheek. This time it was not for sorrow. Alistair saw it. Without breaking rhythm, he lifted his thumb and brushed the tear from her skin. The gesture was so intimate, so shockingly tender, that a collective gasp went through the Dowager's row. The Duchess of Devonshire gripped her fan so hard a stick snapped. The waltz ended. The final chord hung in the air. Alistair did not release her immediately. He held her there, in the center of the floor, for 1, 2, 3 beats. He was branding her. He was marking her as his. Then he bowed. "Thank you, Lady Genevieve." He tucked her hand back into the crook of his arm and escorted her from the floor. The silence broke. A tidal wave of chatter erupted, a frantic, buzzing noise. He walked her to her chaperone, her Aunt Elspeth, who looked as if she had seen a ghost and was seconds from fainting. "Lady Ellaby," Alistair said, his voice polite, "your niece is a superb dancer. I trust you will see her home safely." Aunt Elspeth just gurgled, curtsying so low she nearly fell. Genevieve looked at him, her mind reeling. "Your Grace, I have no words. You have saved me." "I have done nothing, Lady Genevieve," he said. "You saved yourself. You chose to walk back into the ballroom. I merely provided the music." He bowed to her again, a deep, respectful gesture that stunned the crowd for a third time. And with that, Alistair Blackwood, the Duke of Rothschild, turned on his heel and left the ball, having been in attendance for exactly 20 minutes. The next morning, Genevieve Croft's name was on everyone's lips. The whispers that had followed her humiliation were nothing compared to the roaring inferno of speculation that followed the Duke's waltz. She and her aunt were inundated with visiting cards. Cards from people who, just yesterday, would not have given her the time of day. Lady Ellaby's modest sitting room was suddenly the most popular spot in London. "I don't understand," Genevieve said, staring at a particularly gaudy card from the Viscountess Palmerston. "They hated me yesterday." "My dear," Aunt Elspeth said, fanning herself, "they didn't hate you. They were indifferent. Then they were amused by your downfall. Now you are a curiosity. You are the woman who made the Glacial Duke dance. They are terrified of you, and they are dying to know if you are his next Duchess." "That is absurd," Genevieve blushed. He was simply being kind. In his way. "Dukes like Rothschild are not kind," her aunt said tartly. "They are strategic. He did that for a reason, and in doing so, he has utterly destroyed Julian Cavendish." Her aunt was correct. The ton had turned on Cavendish overnight. He was no longer the charming rogue. He was the fool who had insulted a lady, only to have her championed by the most powerful man in the kingdom. Lady Diana Fawsley had reportedly refused to see him when he called, stating she was not at home to bullies. Julian's creditors, who had been patient while he courted an heiress, were suddenly becoming insistent. Genevieve should have felt victorious. But she only felt uneasy. The Duke had saved her, but he had also trapped her in a new, more gilded cage of expectation. And he had not called. He had not sent a note. He had simply vanished. 2 days later, the second wave of the storm broke. It was more subtle this time, a whisper that started in the clubs, not the ballrooms. "You know, Cavendish wasn't wrong about her. Heard she's not as innocent as she looks. Why else would Rothschild defend her so fiercely? Unless he had a reason to, a vested interest." Julian Cavendish, backed into a corner, had decided that if he was going to be ruined, he would not go down alone. He could not attack the Duke, but he could still destroy the woman who had caused his downfall. He began to hint to his friends that his public dismissal of Genevieve was not simple spite. It was the act of a jilted, honorable man. She, he claimed, had been indiscreet. She had pursued him. She had written him letters of a shockingly forward nature. "He claims," Aunt Elspeth reported, her face ashen after returning from a tea, "that you met him, alone, in Hyde Park, by the Serpentine." "That is a lie," Genevieve shot to her feet. We were never alone, not once." "Of course it's a lie, child, but it is a potent one," He is painting you as a calculating, fallen woman, and the Duke as your new, wealthy protector. He is turning Rothschild's act of chivalry into proof of your guilt. He is implying that the Duke danced with you because you are already his. The visiting cards stopped. The few that did arrive were from gentlemen of questionable reputation, invitations to private suppers that made Genevieve feel sick. The ruin Julian had intended was finally complete. It had just arrived a few days late. "Pack your bags, Genevieve," Aunt Elspeth said, her voice trembling with rage and defeat. "We are going home to Kent. This city is a viper pit. Your father was right." Genevieve sank into the chair, the Tatler in her lap, which spoke of a mysterious country beauty and her unorthodox methods of capturing a duke's attention. The Duke had saved her from one humiliation, only to plunge her into a deeper, more permanent one. And this time, there was no marble column to hide behind. She was packing her trunk when a knock came at the door. Not a footman, but a hard, insistent rap. Her aunt answered it. A moment later, she returned, her eyes as wide as saucers. "Genevieve," she whispered, "put down that chemise. His Grace, the Duke of Rothschild, is in our sitting room." Alistair Blackwood was not a man who enjoyed being manipulated, and he, the Duke of Rothschild, was being manipulated by a desperate, debt-ridden fool. He had heard the rumors, of course. His network was vast. His man, Thorn, a man of quiet suits and even quieter inquiries, had reported Cavendish's new narrative before it had even reached the society hostesses. "He is claiming indiscretion, Your Grace," Thorn had reported, standing in the Duke's study. "Letters. A clandestine meeting." "He is a fool," Alistair had replied, staring into the fireplace, "but a dangerous one. He has turned my defense of her into an accusation. Indeed, Your Grace. Lady Genevieve and her aunt are preparing to flee London. They feel they have no other choice." "Leaving confirms his lies," Alistair said, the words a low growl. "Cavendish wins if she runs. He salvages his reputation by proving her a coward." "What are your orders, Your Grace?" Alistair was silent for a moment. This was no longer about a simple waltz. This had become personal. He remembered the feel of her trembling hand on his arm, the defiant pride in her tear-filled green eyes. He had made a promise with that dance. He had, without intending to, taken responsibility for her. "Thorn," he said, turning, "I want you to find out why Cavendish is so desperate. It's not just Lady Diana's fortune. This is too vicious. Find his debts. Find his creditors. Find his forger." "His forger, Your Grace?" "He claims to have letters," Alistair said, a cold smile touching his lips. "If they exist, they are forgeries. Find the man who wrote them. And while you do that, I will pay a social call." Which is how he came to be sitting in Lady Ellaby's modest parlour, which smelled faintly of lavender and panic. Genevieve entered. She was not dressed for a ball. She wore a simple grey travelling dress. Her face was pale, her hair pulled back severely. She looked older, harder. She curtsied. "Your Grace, this is an unexpected honour." "Lady Genevieve," he said, rising. He did not smile. "You are leaving?" It was a statement, not a question. "I have no choice," she said, her voice tight. "You were very kind at the ball, but your kindness has been misinterpreted. Lord Cavendish has seen to that. I will not stay in London to be the subject of your scandal." "His scandal," Alistair corrected. "And you will not leave." "You cannot command me, Your Grace," she flared, her spirit, which he had so admired, rising to the surface. "You may be a duke, but you do not own my reputation. What is left of it, I intend to preserve by retiring from a battle I cannot win." "You can win," he said. if you let me fight it for you. Cavendish has overplayed his hand. He is a gambler who does not know when to fold. And what will you do? Challenge him to a duel? That will only prove his rumors true. A duel is a messy, primitive affair, Alistair said with distaste. I prefer precision. He took a step closer. He claims you wrote him letters. Did you? No, never. He claims you met him by the Serpentine. Did you? Never. I walked there once with my aunt, and he tipped his hat. That is all. I believe you, he said simply, and by the time I am finished, all of London will believe you too. He looked at her, his gaze unwavering. But I need your trust, and I need you to stay. There is a masquerade ball at Vauxhall Gardens in 3 days. I expect to see you there. Vauxhall, Aunt Elspeth squeaked from the corner. But your Grace, that is open to the public. It is barely respectable. And a masquerade, it's a recipe for impropriety. It is, Alistair agreed, which is precisely why Cavendish will be there. It is the perfect place for his brand of theatrics, and it is the perfect place for ours. He turned back to Genevieve. He wishes to ruin you in the shadows. I intend to destroy him in the light. Will you trust me? Genevieve looked at this formidable, impossible man. He had waltzed with her. He had defended her. And now he was in her parlour, demanding she walk back into the fire. Yes, she said. For the next 2 days, Mr. Thorn was a ghost in the alleys of London. He visited 3 different gaming hells. He paid off 2 of Cavendish's valets. He had a very quiet, very polite conversation with a man named Silas, who had a talent for imitating ladies' handwriting. By the evening of the masquerade, Thorn had delivered a full report to his duke. Alistair read it, a slow, cold fury building in his chest. It was worse than he thought. Julian hadn't just been courting Lady Diana for her dowry. He had, at the same time, been systematically defrauding Genevieve's father, Baron Croft. He had offered the Baron a high-interest loan to cover his debts, demanding his gentleman's word that Lord Croft would encourage a match between Julian and Genevieve. Julian's plan was monstrously simple. He would secure the heiress, Lady Diana, and once married, he would use her money to call in the fraudulent loan to Lord Croft, seizing the Croft estate. The land, Thorn discovered, was rumoured to have coal deposits, something the scholarly Baron would never have noticed. The public humiliation of Genevieve was not just spite. It was a calculated move to sever his connection to the Croft family before he married Diana, so that when he seized their lands, it would look like a simple business transaction, not the act of a villain who had jilted the man's daughter. He did not just insult her, Alistair said, his voice deadly quiet. He tried to destroy her entire family. Indeed, Your Grace, Thorn said. The forger, Silas, has also provided a sworn affidavit that Lord Cavendish paid him to create a packet of letters, written in Lady Genevieve's hand. Excellent, Alistair said, fastening the clasp of his dark velvet domino cloak. See that Silas is on a boat to America by midnight with a heavy purse. And see that Cavendish's true creditors, the ones he actually owes money to, are at Vauxhall tonight. I believe I bought all their markers this afternoon. They will be eager to see me. Vauxhall Gardens was a riot of light, music, and anonymity. Thousands of torches lit the winding paths. An orchestra played in the central pavilion, and everywhere there were masks, harlequins, shepherdesses, Roman gods, and Venetian nobles mingled, their voices light with the freedom of disguise. Genevieve felt intensely vulnerable. She wore a simple silver mask and a deep green velvet gown. Her aunt had refused to come, convinced they would all be murdered or, worse, recognized. But Alistair had been clear. He had sent a carriage for her, and she had come. She did not see him. The plan, he had explained, was for her to be seen, to be the bait. He would handle the rest. She walked the main promenade, her heart pounding, feeling the stares of masked figures. The rumour had spread. She was Cavendish's cast-off, Rothschild's new mistress. "Lady Genevieve, fancy seeing you here." She froze. She knew that voice. Julian Cavendish stood before her. He wore the mask of Bacchus, the god of wine, and he was clearly drunk. He was flanked by several of his equally inebriated friends. "I thought you would have fled to the country by now," he sneered, his voice loud. "Or has your new patron given you a taste for public spectacle?" A crowd was gathering. This was what they had come for. The drama. "Lord Cavendish," Genevieve said, her voice shaking but clear. "You are drunk. Please let me pass." "Not so fast," he said, grabbing her wrist. "You're the talk of the town, my dear. Tell me, what does a duke pay for companionship? I was only ever offered your father's failing lands." Genevieve gasped, trying to pull her arm free. The crowd laughed. "And," Julian continued, reaching into his coat, "you deny you pursued me? You deny your pathetic, pleading letters." He produced a packet of letters, tied with a blue ribbon. "I have them right here. Shall I read them? Shall I read how you offered to meet me? How you—" "I think not, Cavendish." The voice cut through the air like a razor. The crowd parted. Alistair Blackwood, the Duke of Rothschild, stood there. He was not wearing a mask. His face was cold, composed, and utterly terrifying. He was flanked by two large, grim-looking men whom Genevieve did not recognize, but who had the distinct look of professional brutes. They were, in fact, the most feared moneylenders in London, now in Alistair's employ. "Rothschild," Julian stammered, his drunken bravado evaporating. He let go of Genevieve's wrist. "You will give me the letters," Alistair said. It was not a request. These are private. She sent them to me. It is a proof of her." "They are forgeries," Alistair said, his voice projecting to the entire crowd. "And I have the forger's sworn confession. A man named Silas, who is, as we speak, on a ship bound for Boston, paid for with your last shilling." Julian's face went white. "You have made a grave error, Lord Julian," Alistair continued, his voice lethally calm. "You assumed Lady Genevieve was an easy target, a poor girl from the country. You humiliated her to secure an heiress, all while planning to defraud her father, Baron Croft, and seize his land by leveraging a fraudulent loan." A gasp went through the crowd. This was more than gossip. This was a crime. "It's a lie!" Julian shouted, desperation making him shrill. "He's lying! She's bewitched him! She's a—" "Silence!" Alistair stepped forward. "You are ruined, Cavendish. I have spent the last 2 days acquiring every single one of your gambling markers, from the Azure Serpent, from White's, even from the card game you played last night. You owe, by my calculations, over £80,000. He nodded to the two men beside him. "And these gentlemen, your creditors, have transferred your debt to me. It is due immediately." Julian stared, trapped. He was, in a single moment, utterly destroyed, not just socially, but financially. He was facing debtor's prison. "You," he whispered, his entire body trembling with rage and fear. "You did this! She did this!" In a last, pathetic act of violence, Julian lunged. Not at the Duke, he wasn't that stupid, but at Genevieve. He raised his hand to strike her. He never made it. Alistair moved with a speed that was shocking. He caught Julian's wrist in a grip of iron, twisting it until Julian cried out and fell to his knees. Alistair looked down at the pathetic, whimpering man. "Thorn," he called. Mr. Thorn materialized from the crowd. "Your Grace?" "Lord Cavendish is unwell. See that he is escorted to his carriage." He will be leaving for the continent tonight. He will not be returning to London. Ever. Very good, Your Grace. Thorn and the creditors hauled the broken man to his feet and dragged him away, his Bacchus mask falling to the ground and shattering on the gravel. The crowd was silent, awestruck. Alistair turned to Genevieve. She was shaking, her hand pressed to her mouth. He stood before her, the entire garden watching. The drama was not over. It was reaching its crescendo. The silence that descended upon the torchlit path was a physical thing. It was a vacuum, left in the wake of Julian Cavendish's ruined, howling exit. The air, which moments before had been filled with his pathetic rage, was now heavy with the smell of damp earth, torch smoke, and the unblinking, breathless scrutiny of hundreds. Genevieve's ears rang. Every eye, hidden behind velvet, silk, or papier-mâché, was fixed on her. She felt flayed, her skin raw. She had been vindicated, yes, but she had been vindicated by a public execution. The man who had humiliated her was gone, broken by the man who now stood beside her, and she was not sure which fact was more terrifying. Alistair Blackwood, the Duke of Rothschild, stood as impassively as if he had just commented on the weather. He had, in the span of 5 minutes, revealed a plot, exposed a forger, confirmed a crime, called in a life-ruining debt, and had a man physically removed, likely from England itself. He was not a saviour. He was a force of nature, a glacier that did not just chill, but crushed everything in its path. Genevieve's knees trembled. The performance was over. The villain was vanquished. Now she was alone on the stage with her frightening champion, and she wanted, more than anything, to flee. She had to get away from these eyes, these whispers that were already reforming, turning from slander to awe. She took a shaky breath and turned to him. She was the daughter of a baron, and she would show her gratitude, even if her heart was threatening to beat its way out of her chest. She sank into a deep, formal curtsy, her green velvet gown pooling on the gravel path. "Your Grace," she whispered, her voice hoarse, her eyes fixed on the ground. "You have, again, I am in your debt, a debt I can never repay. I thank you. You have saved my family's name. I will trouble you no more." She prayed he would just nod, that he would offer a curt, "Go," and she could find her carriage and disappear back to the quiet, safe obscurity of Kent. The show was over. He could release her. Alistair looked down at the top of her bowed head, the rich chestnut hair gleaming in the torchlight. He heard the tremor in her voice, the finality in her words. "I will trouble you no more." She was dismissing him. And in that precise, crystalline moment, a series of thoughts, as sharp and logical as a mathematical proof, clicked into place in his mind. He had come to Vauxhall to dispense justice. He had intended to destroy Cavendish, clear her name, and then, perhaps, quietly see to it that her family's finances were stabilized. He would have been her unseen benefactor, a tidy, logical solution. But as he watched her curtsy, as he saw her preparing to flee, he realized the flaw in his logic. It was not enough. He had saved her from this scandal, but the Tun had the memory of a vulture. She would forever be that Lady Croft, the one who was at the center of the Cavendish affair. She would be a pariah, a curiosity, pitied at best, suspected at worst. She had not asked for his help, and in helping her, he had inadvertently painted an even larger target on her back. She was now Rothschild's project. He thought of his own life, the endless, sterile balls, the simpering debutantes and their calculating mothers, all shoving their pristine, personalityless daughters at his title. He was a prize to be won, not a man to be known. And then there was this woman he had found at her absolute lowest, sobbing in a dark alcove, yet who still had the pride to try and refuse his handkerchief. The woman who had, despite her terror, walked back into the ballroom on his arm. The woman who had just faced down her tormentor, her voice shaking but her spine made of steel. She was fire and water, pride and vulnerability. She was the only real person he had met in a decade. Logic, he realized, was not the only force at play. There was a baser, more possessive instinct. He had defended her. He had championed her. And the thought of letting her go, of letting her slip back into the shadows where she might be harmed again, was unacceptable. Saving her was not enough. He had to keep her. And there was only one, logical, unassailable way to do that. "Rise, Lady Genevieve," he said, his voice quiet, yet it seemed to carry into the furthest reaches of the hushed crowd. She rose slowly, her eyes wide and questioning. "You are not in my debt," he stated. He took a step closer, invading her space. "I am in yours." I do not understand," she stammered, her breath catching. "You, Lady Genevieve, have done the impossible," he said, his voice a low, intimate rumble that was somehow, confoundingly, for her ears alone, despite the hundreds straining to listen. "You have made me attend 2 social functions in 1 week. You have made me engage in gossip, and you have made me care about their outcome." He reached out. Genevieve flinched, but he did not touch her arm. He took her bare, trembling hand. Not her gloved hand, which was a proper, but her bare hand. The contact was a shock, a brand of heat and possession. And then he did the impossible. Alistair Blackwood, the Duke of Rothschild, the glacial Duke, the most powerful and untouchable man in England, released her hand, took a single step back, and sank to one knee on the dirty, gravel-strewn path of Vauxhall Gardens. A sound ripped through the night. It was not a gasp. It was a single, collective, multi-hundred-person inhalation. The sound of the entire ton sucking the very air from the gardens. A woman in a shepherdess mask actually fainted, her companion too stunned to even try and catch her. Genevieve's mind went white. This was a spectacle. This was a scandal. This was worse than anything Cavendish could have ever dreamed of. "Your Grace," she cried, her voice a strangled squeak. She reached down, trying to grab his arm, to pull him up. "What are you doing? Get up! Please! Everyone is staring. You are ruining yourself." He looked up at her. The mask of the impassive Duke was gone. His eyes, which she had only ever seen as cold granite or sharp ice, were now ablaze, lit from within by a fire that was fierce, possessive, and utterly, terrifyingly sincere. "I intend them to," he said, his voice now ringing with authority, silencing the fresh wave of whispers. He did not look at the crowd. He looked only at her. "You came here tonight to face your accuser. But you are all witnesses," he called out, his voice projecting to the masked faces in the trees. "You have heard the whispers. You have reveled in the slander. You called this woman a schemer, a fallen creature, an opportunist. You were entertained by her supposed ruin." He paused, letting the indictment hang in the air. "Now you will witness the truth. You will hear my narrative. I am the Duke of Rothschild, and I am not a man given to whims. I am a man of fact. And the fact is this." He turned his full attention back to Genevieve, his gaze so intense it felt as if it were the only thing holding her upright. "I came late to the Devonshire ball. I have, perhaps, been late my entire life. I was seeking an escape, and instead, in a dark alcove, I found my destiny. I found Lady Genevieve Croft, not scheming, but crying, not calculating, but shattered by the cruelty of the very man you all watched her face tonight. She did not ask for my help. She did not know who I was. She only showed me a courage and a dignity that I have never seen in any London ballroom. His voice softened, meant only for her now. He tried to ruin you because he knew you were priceless. He was right. You are. I have spent my life securing my estates, my title, my fortune. And now I intend to secure my future. Alastro, your grace, she breathed, the tears she had refused to shed all night finally blurring the torches into stars. Alistair, he commanded softly. My name is Alistair, and I will not have you return to Kent as that poor, vindicated girl. I will not allow you to be the subject of rumor ever again. There is only one way to ensure your reputation is forever secure. Only one way to silence every critic and cement your place, not as my project, but as my equal. He took her hand again, his grip firm, a lifeline in the swirling chaos of her mind. Lady Genevieve Croft, he declared, his voice once more a clarion call for all of London to hear. You came to this city seeking a husband to save your family. I came to this garden seeking justice. It seems we both found more than we bargained for. Will you do me the supreme, undeserved honor of becoming my wife? Will you be my Duchess? The world dissolved. There was no Vauxhall. There were no masks, no torches, no silent, staring crowd. There was only this man, kneeling on the ground, offering her not just a title, not just safety, but himself. The man who had given her a handkerchief, the man who had commanded an orchestra, the man who had moved heaven and earth to defend her, not because she was a prize, but because she was herself. She saw two futures. One, a quiet, grey life in Kent, forever marked by this season. The other was a terrifying, brilliant, impossible life at the side of this man. It was not a rescue. It was a challenge, and she had never been a coward. You are serious, she whispered, the tears finally tracing hot paths down her cheeks. I have never been more serious in my life, he vowed, his eyes never leaving hers. She took a shaky breath. She drew herself up, finding that Croft spine one last time. Yes, she whispered, for him. Then, finding her voice, she said it again, louder, for all of them. For the rumour-mongers, for the critics, for the entire world that had tried to tear her down. Yes, Alistair, I will. A sigh, a great collective exhalation, swept the gardens. He rose in one fluid, powerful motion. He did not release her hand. For a heart-stopping second, Genevieve thought he might kiss her, in front of everyone. But Alistair Blackwood was still a master of the public gesture. A kiss was private. A vow was public. He lifted her hand to his lips. He did not kiss her palm or her wrist. He pressed a firm, warm, and profoundly respectful kiss to her knuckles. It was a kiss of fealty, a knight to his queen, a man to his partner. He then tucked her hand securely into the crook of his arm, turning her to face the crowd. He was smiling. Not a twitch, but a true, small, devastating smile of triumph. The Duke and his future Duchess. I believe, my dear, he murmured, his voice laced with a warmth she'd never heard. It is time we left. We have a wedding to plan. He leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. And I must send a missive to your father. We have an estate to discuss. Thorn's reports mention the distinct possibility of coal. He turned, and with Genevieve on his arm, he began to walk. The crowd, which had pressed in, parted before them like the Red Sea. The whispers that followed were no longer slanderous, no longer speculative. They were definitive. The Duchess, He knelt, his future Duchess. Genevieve walked beside him, her head held high, her hand steady on the arm of the man who had arrived late, and in doing so had given her a new beginning. And so, the Duke who arrived late found he was exactly on time. By exposing a villain's plot, Alistair not only saved Genevieve's reputation, he found his own heart. Theirs was a love story that began not with a perfect smile, but with the honest sound of tears, and was sealed not with a secret whisper, but with a public declaration that shook society to its core. The Tun wanted a scandal, but the Duke and his new Duchess gave them a love story that would be told for generations. Did you love the drama and the triumphant ending of Alistair and Genevieve? If you did, please don't let this story end here. Show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves a good romance. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more epic historical dramas just like this one. We read every comment. So let us know what you thought of the Duke's grand gesture.